Okay, in this video we're going to quickly cover how you can duplicate prefabs and change the way that they look. We're going to re-go over functions because it's quite an important concept that you get a good understanding of. We're going to go a little bit deeper with that in passing parameters, and we'll also do some commenting. Now I want to add the second set of objects. We're going to call these the drop-downs. So in the game, this is the finished game. Here we've got the pickups, which increase the score, and we've got the drop-downs, which reduce the score. So we're going to go about adding those now. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to duplicate the pickup. To do that, I go to Edit, and then I can scroll down here and see Duplicate. That'll make an entirely different prefab here. Still based off the same original, but that's okay. Okay, we're going to go Open Prefab and give it a name. I'm going to call this one Drop Down. Okay, and for a tag, I'm going to go Add Tag, and I'm going to give it a new tag. We're going to call this Drop Down. Save. Once again, we've got to go back to our inspector. Oh, didn't save that. Drop Down. Rename file. Cool. So now when I click here, I've got to redo it. So we'll change it to Drop Down. So if I click on that one, it's still pick up. If I click on this one, it's drop down. At this stage, if I were to place it on the board, so if I can just do that by here, so the one that's going to be just to the right of our character will be the drop down. If I play the game, you can't actually tell, it looks exactly the same. So we need to make it stand out visually a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new material. Create material. We're going to choose the color. There we go, and we'll just make it a nice red color for now. Click on X, and all we need to do is drag that material, give it a name, sorry. So give it a name by double clicking on it. We will call this drop down, and I'm just going to drag that onto this prefab. If I click on play, now you can see it stands out. Currently, if I click on nothing will happen because we need to modify our code. Okay, so I'm going to remove this prefab from the screen because we want to generate them through code. So we're going to go back to our game manager, and we're just going to work our way through it. Okay, so we're going to go to here, we're going to go public, game object, we'll just call it drop down. We'll save that. Now we're going to go back to our Unity, and we'll click on the game manager, and there's a drop down here which is not associated. We'll drag up our prefab. That's that done. Go back to our code. Now we need to basically just work our way through it. So all I'm going to do for now, this is not going to be the final version. I'll copy this code and I'll paste it in there. And we're just going to set, instead of instantiating a pickup, we'll instantiate a drop down. Save that. I'll do the rotation as well. Drop down. Save that. Go back to our game. There you go. So we've now got our 4 pickups, which will be working still. Nothing's changed there. And we've now got our 4 pickups. Nothing happens when we highlight those, but we've got to do that now. And let's tidy this up. Before we move any further, let's tidy this up. Remember how I talked about dry code? Do not repeat yourself. You can see quite easily that this piece of code here and this piece of code here repeat themselves. Alright, so we need to do something about that. So one way that we've already encountered of not repeating yourself is by using for loops. So if you want the exact same thing to happen multiple times, you can use a for loop. However, this is not going to be exactly the same because there's going to be some slight differences here. Pickup turns into the word drop down. So what we're going to do is we want a way of taking this piece of code and putting it elsewhere in our code so that we can call on it when we need it. Alright, we've already covered this a little bit, but I'm just going to go over it a little bit more. The way we're going to do that is by using functions. Okay, this is just going to be a little bit of a recap on how functions work. So in front of you here we've got a simple function, standard structure. So just going through it. The first thing that you see there is going to either say private or public. We usually set it as private, or we can leave it out because if it's not there, then it is a private variable. Okay, so only set it to public if you actually need it to be public. The next thing along there is the void. Void means that nothing is going to be returned back from the function. At this stage, you don't have to worry about that. Just make sure you put the word void in there. The next thing is the name of the function. Make sure you choose a meaningful name for the function. And the name should be followed by a bracket, which is these two brackets here. Then following that, you'll have an opening squiggly bracket and a closing squiggly bracket. These are the start and end of the function. Whatever's in between those will be executed when the function is called. Alright, and so to call the function, all we have to do is type in the name. So let's see what an example of that would look like in code. I'm just going to do it in my game manager. Okay, so we're just going to do the function at the end of our code. We'll start doing here, so private void, that's always void. We leave it private unless we need otherwise. Name of the function, it's going to be double number, round bracket, squiggly bracket. Whatever's in the middle here is the contents, what's going to be executed when we call that function. So we're just going to say print 5 times 2. And we'll go squiggly bracket. Oh, sorry, semicolon. So right now, if I ran that, nothing would happen because this function has not been called. To call that function, all I need to do is copy that name and with the double bracket. So we'll just put it inside start. Oops, lost the D. Put a semicolon after that. So now if we go back and run our code, press play, go to the console, you can see that it prints out 10, which is 5 times 2. Why is that useful? Well, we can, if we go back to our code and we want the same thing to happen multiple times, if I copy that line 3 more times, what would you expect to happen? You see that it prints it out 4 times because I've got that function in there 4 times. Okay, so that's a simple example of how a function can be used. However, in our case, that's not entirely useful because we don't want to print out the exact same thing 4 times. We want it to vary slightly. So to achieve that, we're going to do something called parameters. So a parameter is how we can make a function a little bit more dynamic. So it's not always doing the same thing. So what we can do is we can pass over parameters to the function. The parameters go inside the brackets. So in this case, we've got double number. We're going to put the number 5 inside the round brackets here. And what will happen is that number will get passed over into the function. Yeah, so where it said number, that will now get replaced by the number 5. And wherever else the word number is used, that will become the number 5. So that will print out exactly the same, 5 times 2, which is 10. Okay, so let's look at that in our code. So we're just going to put a number here, 5. We'll comment these ones out. It's saying there's an error right now because our function down below is not expecting anything to be passed over. So what we need to do there is we need to, inside the brackets here, we need to define what type of thing is being passed across. In this case, it's an integer, and when it comes across, we want to store it in a variable called number. And then down here, we're going to use number. So if I run that now and go back to here and click on play console, see it prints out the number 10. However, because we've done it dynamically, I don't have, if I want to calculate 7 times 2 or 8 times 2, I don't have to do it down here. I can just come up here and pass over a different number, and it will automatically, the function will automatically update. So we would expect that to be 10, 8 times 2 is 16, 2 times 2 is 4, 17 times 2 is 34. So those are the values that I would expect to see. Once again, this is an expected test. If I click on play and go over to the console, you can see 10, 16, 4, 34. So that's the way we can pass over parameters to our function. Okay, so let's get rid of this for now, because that's not what we want to do in our finished thing. We're just going to actually do it properly now. So, first thing we ask ourselves, what do we want to pass over? What do we want to stay the same? What's repeated? Well, it's basically that bit there is repeated down there. Yeah, so I'm just going to make that, take that, cut that, and paste that down here inside a function. So I will create a function here, private void draw objects. You can call it what you want, just make sure it's meaningful. Squiggly bracket, paste that in. Okay, so now if I wanted to call this function, all I need to do is copy that, and instead of having this piece of code here, I call draw objects. Okay, so if I run it now, I need to put semicolons at the end of the line, sorry. If I run it now, it's going to call that function number of pickup times, which is 4. So it'll call it 4 times and then call it again 4 times. And each time it calls it, that's the piece of code that'll get executed. So it'll generate 2 random numbers and then instantiate a new pickup. So if we go back to our game, you can see that we've now got 8 objects on the screen because it's been called twice in 2 series of for loops. Getting there, still not quite exactly what we want. Once again, we need to be able to make it so it's a little bit more dynamic and change what is getting passed across. To do that, we're going to change this so that we are changing what's getting passed across. Alright, so this time when it goes through, I want to draw a pickup. And this time when it goes through, I want to draw a drop down. Yep. Now it's giving me an error now because it doesn't have a function down there that is expecting a game object, which is what these are. Pick up and drop down a game objects. So down in my function here, I'm going to type in game object, and we've got to give it a name. So we'll just call it object. That's a special word. We'll just call it my object. Cool. Now that will tell me that there are no errors because it's got a function down below which is expecting to receive a game object. However, we're not using this variable. At the moment, it would still just draw 8 pickups because we're not using it. To make it more so it's used it, we've got to use that variable inside our code. So we'll use that there, and we'll use it there. Just see how that works, and then we'll come back and deal with it. So you can see now, we have got 1, 2, 3, 4 pickups, 1, 2, 3, 4 drop downs. Beautiful. So let's just go back to the code to have a bit of a look. So once again, up here we're calling draw objects pickup. So basically, pickups is coming into here. This object is expecting, this function, sorry, is expecting a game object, which we're going to put into my object. So the variable which we called pickup will now be put into my object, basically. Yep. And then wherever it sees my object, here and here, that would also be replaced with pickup. So it's basically the same as that. Yeah. And then the next time it's called, we're passing over a drop down. So down here, yeah, wherever it's drop down will go into my object. So wherever it sees my object, it will be replaced with drop down, and that will be executed. Okay, so it's a much more efficient way of doing it. We need to give this a meaningful comment. Instantiates game objects, instantiates passed over game objects, at random locations. Cool. Look up here. All right. We pretty much get in there. However, one thing I would say is there's a chance we don't want to draw the same number as drop downs as pickups. So what we want to do is go into here. We'll copy that line, and we'll call this number of drop downs, and we'll make that 2, and we'll just paste that into there. Okay, so if my code is right, we should have 4 pickups and 2 drop downs. Let's have a look. That should say pickups. Okay, so that number of pickups, it's going to pick up. Number of drop downs, it'll draw the drop down. So if I go back to my code, what I should expect to see is 4 pickups and 2 drop downs. 1, 2, 3, 4 pickups, 2 drop downs. Cool.